Shalom and welcome back to Israel with Aline. Today we are back in Jericho. However, to talk about one of the most terrible periods in the history of this city, a period of curse, famine, and death. And this centuries-old curse was broken thanks to the great miracle performed by the prophet Elisha when he purified the waters. And today we will have exclusive access to see the true spring of Elisha, the spring where the miracle happened. And no, it's not the spring you usually see in photos and videos. We are going to see the place where the biblical story actually happened. So if you are ready, let's get started. We are now literally walking on the remains of biblical Jericho. Look, for example, at these buildings which are from the Bronze Age. And last week we got to know the archaeology of this place in depth, including the walls that fell before Joshua. And the people of Israel, if you want to watch the full video, I'll leave it linked at the end of this video so you can watch it. But what we came to talk about today is what happened after the walls fell and the city was burned. What happened is that Joshua cursed this place and anyone who tried to rebuild the city. At that time, Joshua made the people swear and say, "Cursed before the Lord is the man who rises up and rebuilds this city of Jericho with stone. He will lay its foundations at the cost of his firstborn, and at the cost of his youngest son he will set up its gates." And the archaeology of this place proves exactly that. The archaeologists found, after the city was burned, a large layer of abandonment, showing that the city remained uninhabited for centuries and centuries and centuries. We know that it remained empty for about 500 years. However, there is always that person who disobeys God, and in this case it was Yael, the Bethelite, and when he rebuilds the city, God's words are fulfilled. Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel and reigned for 22 years over Israel in Samaria. During his reign, Yael of Bethel rebuilt Jericho in his days. Yael the Bethelite built Jericho when he laid the foundations of the city. His firstborn son Abiram died, and when he set up the gates, his youngest son Segub died. According to the word of the Lord announced through Joshua, son of Nun. But at the same time, it doesn't surprise us that the city was rebuilt exactly at this time during the reign of King Ahab and his terrible wife Jezebel. They were known for introducing idolatry into the kingdom of Israel, especially idolatry and the worship of Baal and Asherah. And Ahab and Jezebel, they also persecuted and killed the prophets of the Lord. They had no respect for the word of God, and precisely then it is no surprise that they were the ones who allowed the reconstruction of Jericho, and the main curse fell upon Yael and his sons and his family. But even after the city was rebuilt and functioning, we can see that the weight of the curse still hung over the city. And already in the first years after the reconstruction of Jericho, the local population realized that the city's waters were bad. And about 20 years after the reconstruction of the city, the person who passes through this area is the prophet Elisha. He was on the other side of the Jordan River when the prophet Elijah was taken up to heaven. He and then the prophet Elisha parts the waters of the Jordan and crosses into the promised land. Something very similar to what Joshua had done, and Elisha comes to the city of Jericho. And when he arrives here, the men of the city welcome him and beg for his help and take him to this source of bad water. And now I want you to see, come with me to see the true spring of Elisha, and it is right here next to the ancient city. Now we will have access to the spring of Elisha. In Hebrew it is called Mayan Elisha, and in Arabic Ain Sultan. And take a good look at the location where we are. Here, on the other side of the street, we see Tel El Sultan, the biblical archaeological hill of Jericho. And simply by walking a few meters, we arrived here at this water spring, and as you could see for yourselves, access to this place is restricted. And why? Because even today, it is the main water source for Jericho. This is the source of life for the more than 20,000 people who live here in the city, and that's why its waters need to be protected. But how can we know that this spring is really Elisha's source? First, because of its location. If this spring didn't exist, Jericho would never have arisen in biblical times because we are in the middle of a desert. In this region, it rains less than 150 millimeters per year. And that's why this spring has been, since biblical times and even to this day, the source of water and life for Jericho. And it's a source of abundant water. In the winter, the flow is 236 liters per second, and in the summer, it's 105 liters per second. The annual average is 170 liters per second, and that in total is 536 billion liters per year, which is more than 5 million cubic meters. That's an impressive amount, especially considering we're in the middle of the Judean desert. That means, yes, there is a big variation in the amount of water between summer and winter, but yes, it's a reliable water source. Every year the water flows, and that's why there was enough water both for its population and for its agriculture. Notice that the Bible has a nickname for the city of Jericho, which is the city of palms, but a more accurate translation would be the city of date palms. Ayar 80 Marim. Notice how important this name is, the name that the city of Jericho receives. A city in the middle of the desert was known in biblical times precisely because of its great agriculture. But the question we need to answer together now is whether this is the only water source of Jericho from biblical times. And the answer is yes and no. There are some other water sources. One of them is called En-Kelt, which is about 6 or 7 kilometers from here, but there are some problems with En-Kelt. First, besides the distance and 6 or 7 kilometers to fetch water every day, it wasn't feasible in those times. Besides that, En-Kelt has a very large variation in water between summer and winter. In the summer, there's very little water, which wouldn't be enough to sustain an entire city. That's why in later periods, from the Roman period onward, Yes, they used Enkelt as a supplementary water source, never as the main source. And the other spring in the region is in Nuema, which is 5 kilometers from Jericho, which would have been far to fetch water in ancient times. And also the water flow is small, and the last possible water source would be a stream. Seasonal ones that appear with the sudden floods in the winter. This phenomenon still exists today. However, this kind of water is usually not suitable for human consumption. It could be used for agriculture, but a city couldn't survive on that alone. We can see that the spring itself is right there, just a few meters away from us. And this is the only possibility of being the true source of Jericho, the spring of Elisha. And when he arrives here, these were bad waters, waters that caused infertility in the land and also infertility in women. So they returned to Elisha, who had stayed in Jericho. The men of the city said to Elisha, "Behold, this city is well situated. As you can see, however, the water is not good and the land is barren." He said, "Bring me a new bowl and put salt in it," and they brought it to him. Then Elisha went to the spring and threw the salt into the water and said, "This is what the Lord says, I will make this water healthy. It will no longer cause death or infertility." And that water has remained healthy to this day. The second word that Elisha had spoken, the Bible often refers to the earth, not just in the sense of soil, but in the sense of the population, the people who lived in that land. That's why we see expressions in the Bible that say the land rejoiced or the land sinned, not meaning that the soil sinned, but that the people who lived there sinned. The expression that appears in the original text in Hebrew is the following, "And the sea is bad and the land is bad." And the key word is mishkalet, which comes from the root of the verb shachal. And this verb is used in the Bible to indicate the infertility of women. And not only of the earth, we also see this in the verses of Exodus 23. Lo tye meshakela ve'akara be'artsecha. In your land there will be no woman who miscarries, nor any who is barren. And that's why when we read the verses about Elisha at the source, the Hebrew text makes it clear that the land and its people were infertile. The waters of the city affected everything, the crops, the herds, and the people of the city. And that's why Elisha's miracle was not just agricultural, it was a much deeper one. It restores life. A Jericho analyst. We said that this spring is the source of living water for the city of Jericho to this day. But people no longer come here with pitchers, with jars to fetch water to take home. And yes, modernity has arrived in Jericho, and that's why most of the water from this spring is now piped. We can even see here a small part of these pipes, and that's how the water is brought to people's homes. But what I find really beautiful is that, yes, the city hall allows part of the water to keep flowing and form this stream that runs through the city. In the inner part where we were, it's not allowed to get to the water or touch it. And it makes perfect sense because from there the water goes to people's homes. But here it is allowed. And I can't miss this opportunity to touch the waters of Elisha's spring. And now I want you to imagine this area here with me. Elisha with his little jar, throwing salt into the waters to purify them. And these waters here have remained clean to this day after more than 3,000 years. It's truly something magnificent how we can literally touch and even bathe in the waters of biblical history here. But there's something a little strange about this story, because why Elisha specifically? To heal the waters, he takes a bowl with salt. What's the point of throwing salt into the waters? At first glance, this might seem to make no sense at all. How could throwing salt into a spring of water make it clean and pure? Logic tells us that salting the water would have the opposite effect. If we look at the Bible, we see that salt is a very clear symbol of a lasting covenant, of an eternal covenant with God, and we see many examples of this in the Bible. This is the everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord for you and your descendants. Salt represents something incorruptible, stable, and faithful. Elisha was not chemically treating the water. He was there declaring a covenant of restoration with God. Exactly what healed the waters was not the salt itself, but rather those prophetic words. And why did that bowl have to be new? First, to separate the common from the consecrated. You shouldn't use an ordinary bowl that you use for food, for anything, to perform an act for God. You also couldn't know if that bowl had been used for something else, maybe for sacrifices or maybe for something related to idolatry. So, because of that, a new bowl was needed. And more than that, the new bowl represented a break from Jericho's past, a past of destruction and curse. And now Elisha was opening a new chapter in the biblical history of that place. And the healing of these waters was permanent. The Bible tells us that these waters remain healthy to this day, and here the truth of Jericho is revealed. These waters are pure, they are good, they are used even to this day. But let's use a bit of science. How pure are these waters really? Scientists do daily monitoring of the water quality because it supplies an entire city. And the average chloride level here in these waters is about 30 milligrams per liter, which is extremely low. And that's great, much better than the national average for all of Israel. Look at this. For water to be pleasant, for its taste, it needs to have less than 200 or 250 milligrams per liter. And here it has about 30, which is well below the limit. And that's why legally this water can be used. But just to make a comparison with Israel, the country's aquifers have an average of 143 milligrams per liter. That means that this spring here in the middle of the desert, which used to have bad water, caused so much suffering for the people of Jericho. Exactly. They are better than almost all the other springs in the whole region. And this shows that the Bible, down to its very last word, is correct. And this miracle here was perpetual. This was Elisha's first public miracle, and it was a discrete miracle, but one that impacted generations. And even to this day, we can see a small part of the water that continues to flow through the streets of Jericho. Most people who come to visit Jericho and look for Elisha's spring end up at this place. And that's why if we search the internet for photos and videos, 99% of the time this is the place that's shown. But today we saw the truth, and the truth is huge. We saw the amount of water that springs up in this place. Like a spring from biblical times until today, it is a source of life for a city of more than 20,000 inhabitants. It's really amazing, and not only is it a source of water, but it's also an extremely good source of water, exactly as the Bible tells us now. Regarding this spring, everyone, this is not a lie, but the real spring that we saw today, it runs through that stream, and this stream also comes here. So this is not Elisha's spring, the real spring that we saw, but the waters that arrive at this place originally come from Elisha's spring. And so, if you come to visit the Holy Land, you now know exactly what you will find in this city filled with biblical history. If you enjoyed learning a bit more about this very special miracle, don't forget to leave your like and share this video so that more people can learn the truth about Jericho. A big hug, and I'll see you next time.